Manufactory. Today's update, well, it's been sitting on its suspension long enough. So today I welded in the connectors, and next up is the struts for the shock towers. But you'll see I got everything in and everything fits real good. The splash guards and the screws. Looks pretty good. I'm gonna seam seal the connector here and up under this ledge right up there where mine leaked. Just because. Get it all seam sealed up and around. All of this around here. The leg of the connector. So anyway, that's what I'm doing today. Sorry for all the banging in the background. My ventilation system up here has flappers on it, and the wind is just blowing like crazy. So those flappers are banging open and closed, venting my heat out into space. Well, here I go. I'm laying out the first of the plates. This is the one that goes on the underside and matches the plate on the Monte Carlo bore. This design pretty much is the way I've been thinking about it in my head for a long time, ever since I started the whole chassis stiffeners deal. I really haven't changed the design of it in my head. I mean, you know, now after I've built it and seen it on the car, I've come up with some different ideas. But pretty much this is the way I've always thought about doing this. So I'm just laying it out. I'm still using my die grinder as a cutter, and this is just a triangle, and you notice it's got a little ear there just to increase the support of the strut itself. And oh yeah, I bent it 90 degrees, and hey Don, no, those aprons aren't bent at 90 degrees there at the top. The idea is to get it to fit perfect. At this point, I am cutting spacers. The underside of the apron has a bunch of different thickness metals. You know, there's the shock tower, and then there's the guard thing, you know, with the rubber bumper on it. All of those thicknesses of metal have to be accounted for so that when it bolts up tight. All right, let's stick it together and do a little mock-up. And there it is. It's just put together with tape so that I could go try it and bolt it in and see if it fit. Then I have to set it up and weld it. Using the same methodology here of all relative measurements and drilling and welding and such. First thing, of course, tack it and then go try it and then come back and do all the welding of it. Trying to keep it cool so it doesn't change the shape of it, you know. Looking at it now, it's a little complicated, I guess is the word I would call it. At the time, I guess I had brain lock and I just didn't think of a better way to do it. You'll notice that there's also a little cutaway for those dents they put at the top of the apron to give it strength so that the lip the fender bolts to has more strength. So I had to accommodate for that. And every time I'm walking away, that's me trying the part in the spot to make sure that it fits. Now I'm drilling it, of course, relatively speaking. This is what I've got so far. The bracket I was just making there. I can cut some of this off the bottom. It doesn't really need to be there. Ended up adding thickness onto it here to make up for the thickness difference between the guard plus the shock tower and then just the surface of the apron. So that's kind of where I'm at so far. This here strut will go in about there. This bolt won't be this long, of course. And then what I'll have is a bracket that fits right along this line right here that this sits on. It'll be plugged on the end. Might run it up just a bit higher. I'd have to take that bolt out of there, but I didn't want to yet. It's actually not touching right here. It looks like it is, but there's actually just a little bit of clearance there. because it's resting on this piece right here. It's going to be pushing, this bar is going to be pushing, and a lot of the force is going to be over here on this side of the bracket. So I wanted to reinforce that, put some thickness there so that that bracket didn't flex like so. I might even, why couldn't I make another piece along here that just caps the end of it? That would really stop any sort of flex between the top and the sides too. I mean, it would really rigidify it. All right, on to making the brackets or gussets for the struts there. This is making the pieces that go on the underside of the strut and tie it to the bracket you just saw. Also making the top fillet. I decided that a little extra bracket would be nice. Lots of fitting, grinding, refitting, grinding, refitting. I used cardstock to make patterns that I've used to get the metal into a relatively close shape, but then after that it was all just grinding. Sure was a lot of work making these darn things. There's just so much fitting, sanding, grinding, just overall tweaking of the design. Now it's just a question of getting those gussets welded in the right place. So I clamped the strut in there, tacked it. I had to weld those brackets fully in because I wouldn't be able to weld it after the strut was in place. Time to weld the gussets in, then move on to the car and weld the bracket that goes to the cowl with the strut clamped in place. Like so. Then weld the cowl plate onto the strut at the proper angle. Then back to the car to do the final tack weld of the strut to the main bracket. Sorry I don't have a shot of that, but the battery died on the camera. It's kind of a monstrosity, but this is the strut. I probably over-engineered. I mean, this end is just a piece of cake. It's the flat plate that goes onto the corner of the cowl. Ended up welding the nuts onto it because especially this one down here, you'd never get anything on there to get the nut in. So I just bolted this thing up nice and tight and welded the nuts on so that it can just bolt up. So, hey, let's go see how it fits. Grab all the nuts and bolts. So, pretty simple. There's 3 bolts that hold it to the cowl over here. We'll get those in first. Everything should stay loose until all the bolts are in, of course. Carefully hand starting everything, because at this stage of the game with all the nuts welded in, I better not cross thread anything. There we go. Boy. Oh no. Things are just slightly out of alignment. I did a pretty good tacking of all the welds before. I mean, I had things really tight when I was tacking things in. And then I put quite a few welds on it because I didn't want it to whoops. That's not quite right. And there is an order with which to tighten the bolts. As in, we want to just barely snug this one first, and then this one here, and then this one, and then this one. Now these and there it is. Surprise, surprise. She's in. Should be pretty stable. Oh yeah, and by the way, yes, I did bolt in the export brace as well. I had the export brace bolted, Monte Carlo bar bolted, and I put the connectors in the other day, and the whole point was to get everything set so that I could do this, because boy, once these are in, this area up here at the connector isn't going to move at all. I ended up putting extra gussets in because I was worried about this thing moving this way, you know, flexing this way, and then just bending this strut. I think maybe I'll go ahead and trim this little piece off here. It's kind of extraneous at this point. I've got OSPO on it, so I'm prepping it for paint. But yeah, it was a little more confabulated. It's more of a contrivance than I had anticipated. Okay, passenger side strut complete. I have now got it primed, and it's 9:30, so it's quitting time. Next morning, and I've got the bracket on the driver's side moving along. Just finished the driver's side strut. Hi, welcome to Don's Manufactory. Today's update, still working on the struts. These are the final piece of the chassis stiffeners. I'm experimenting with paint. I took the Rust-Oleum flat black and I put the catalyst in it, which is supposed to raise the gloss of the paint. So what I'm hoping for is that when it dries, it will be that semi-flat black that I can then paint the engine compartment, the doors, the inside of the doors with, that kind of thing. I just hope it turns out good. The construction is very sturdy. The problem with this particular design is that it's going to collect mud and dirt and stuff inside this cavity here. But I just couldn't come up with a way, or at least I haven't yet, come up with a way to design this so that it's sort of a self-contained solid sealed unit that has all the nuts and everything in it that I can actually build, that I have the tools to build, so that isn't the case. So at this point, I'm just going to install them this way. But it would be nice if dirt didn't collect in there, because it'll make them rust out prematurely. Looking at the painted strut here, you can tell that there's just not a lot of difference between the flat and the satin paint when it's been catalyzed. I seam sealed all of the staples for the rubber, just to keep them from rusting out. And I put some of that experimental flat black paint on this too, because I want to see how it compares to the semi or the satin black that I painted over there. Also, you'll notice that the hinges are painted. They're brown. They're not like the brown because they're not metallic, but they're painted a close enough brown that they're just not going to stand out. And I'll be fogging regular paint in here eventually when I do all the jamming of everything. So today I am testing the chassis stiffeners. The whole front end is bolted together, so I'm going to put the car up on jack stands and take the weight of the motor on and off the front end and measure how much sag there is in the chassis to find out how much better this chassis is now that it's got all of those little pieces in there, like subframe connectors and my own chassis stiffeners, torque boxes, that kind of thing. Plus the Monte Carlo bar and export braces bolted in as well. So we will see. It's going to be fun. This is kind of the last chapter in chassis stiffeners. Okay, let's get to it. In this shot, you can see 1/8 of an inch of core support movement up and down due to the hanging of the weight of the motor. The jack stands are under the torque boxes. In all fairness, I also put the jack stands under the A-pillar, and then the whole cowl and windshield post and everything move. Here, you can see the connector actually bow and flatten out from hanging the weight. Okay, so coming up is this is the shot of the jack stands under the A-pillar. It's got 1/4 of an inch like this. So all in all, compared to the 1/2 inch or a little more than that it had before, I've reduced the flexing in the front end by 75%, I would say. That's today's update. Thanks for watching. Later.